My name is Emma Lawson. I'm 33 years old, and this is the story of how my parents tried to destroy me in court and ended up destroying themselves instead. The sound of the gavel echoed before I even sat down. It was a sharp, final sound, like a door slamming shut. My parents, Deborah and Carl Lawson, were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They were whispering to each other, their heads bowed together. They were pretending to be victims. They had practiced this. When I walked into the courtroom, my mother looked up. She saw me and she rolled her eyes. It was the same look she gave me when I was a teenager, the look that said, "You are an inconvenience. You are crashing an adult dinner." My father leaned back in his chair. He had a small, confident smirk on his face. They thought they had already won. They looked at me like I was a problem they were about to solve. But the judge, he was different. He was reading the file, and when he looked up to see who had entered, he froze. His pen stopped moving. His expression changed completely. His eyes went from my face to my parents and then back to my face. He knew exactly who I was, and in that 1 second, he knew they had just walked into a storm they were not prepared for. And before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment, where are you watching from? My earliest memory is not of a birthday party. It is not of a hug from my mother. My earliest memory is of being left behind. I remember a brown suitcase by the front door. It was bigger than I was. I remember the smell of my mother's perfume, sharp and sweet. It always smelled like lilies and something cold. I remember the sound of her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. And then, the sound of the front door closing. I stood at the window, my hands flat against the cold glass. I watched the car pull away. It was a shiny, dark blue car. I did not cry. I just watched until it was a small dot, and then it was gone. The house was quiet. I remember my father's voice. He was on the phone in the kitchen. He sounded annoyed. He said, "She'll be better off with Grandma. We can't handle this right now. We're busy." I was 3 years old. I did not know what busy meant. I only knew that the house was empty and the perfume smell was gone. I sat by the front door, on top of my suitcase, and waited. I thought they were coming back. They did not come back. My grandmother, Margaret Lawson, came instead. She arrived a few hours later. Her car was old and green. It made a rattling sound. She did not wear perfume. She smelled like soap and old books. She did not cry when she saw me. She just looked at me sitting on the suitcase and her face softened. She knelt and her knees cracked. She was not like my mother. She was not shiny. Her hands were warm and dry and they had lines all over them. "Well then," she said. Her voice was calm, like the surface of a pond. "Let's go home, Emma." She picked up my suitcase in one hand and held my small hand in the other. We walked out of the house. I did not look back. She raised me in a quiet house on the edge of Cape Cod. The house smelled like lemon polish and a little bit like the salty air from the ocean. The wind was always rattling the windows, but inside, it was warm. Grandma Margaret wasn't rich. She was real. She was a librarian for 40 years. She wore cardigans and sensible shoes that did not click. She made soup from scratch. We had a small garden in the back, and she taught me how to plant tomatoes. She taught me how to pull weeds. "You have to get the whole root, Emma," she would say. "If you leave any of the root, it just grows back." She was not just talking about weeds. She was the one who was there. She was the one who stayed. When I was little, she read me bedtime stories. But they were not fairy tales about princesses. She would pull a big, heavy book from her shelf. The pages were yellow and thin, like onion skin. They were her old law books from a college she went to long ago. I would sit in my pajamas, and she would point to the words. She would simplify the stories for me. "See this man?" she would say, pointing to a line of text. "He is trying to take his neighbor's land. He is saying the fence is in the wrong place. Is it?" I asked. "He knows it isn't," she'd say softly. "He is lying. He wants something that is not his. He is using loud words to scare his neighbor." "What happens?" "The neighbor has a map," she said, her finger tracing another line. "The neighbor has the proof. The lie does not matter when you have the proof." She would read me stories about wills and contracts and people who tried to cheat. "You'll understand people better if you understand how they lie, Emma," she'd say, closing the book. "People use words to hide things. They use anger to hide guilt. They use tears to hide greed. Our job is to be quiet and watch. The truth is always there. It just doesn't shout. I grew up in the library where she worked. I did my homework at the back table. I learned to love the smell of paper and dust. I learned to be quiet. I learned to watch. By the time I was 10, I could spot deceit faster than most adults. I knew when the neighbor was lying about her cat knocking over our trash can. I knew when a kid at school was lying about their homework. It was a feeling I got. A quiet wrongness. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at my parents. They did not visit. They did not call on my birthday. I was the child they had put in a drawer and closed. My 16th birthday was on a Saturday. Grandma woke me up with pancakes. She had saved for months and bought me a used bicycle. It was blue. I loved it. That afternoon, a card arrived in the mail. It was from my parents. I remember my hands shaking a little. I thought, this is it. This is the year they remember me. I opened it. It was a generic card with a picture of a balloon. Inside, the handwriting was my mother's, sharp and sloped. Happy birthday, Emma. Hope you're doing well. We're busy. Underneath, my father had just signed his name. Carl. There was a $20 bill inside. I stared at the words. We're busy. The same words from the phone call. The same words from every Christmas card. Grandma saw my face. She took the card from my hand and looked at it. She did not say they were bad people. She just nodded slowly. Some people, she said, only know how to value things in dollars. They don't know how to value time. The $20 is for them, Emma. It makes them feel like they are good parents. It is not for you. She took the $20 bill. Let's go buy ice cream. Their treat. She taught me how to take the sting out of their poison. I kept those cards. I put them in a shoebox under my bed. Every Christmas, every birthday, the same card, the same message. We're busy. I kept them as a reminder that their absence was a choice. By the time I was 20, I was studying pre-law. I was not going to be a librarian. I was going to be the one who held the map, the one who had the proof. I was going to protect people like my grandmother. I worked hard. I got scholarships. I paid my own way. I did not call my parents. I did not send them cards. I was busy. I was busy building a life they had no part in. I was busy becoming the person my grandmother raised me to be. Grandma Margaret passed away on a Tuesday in April. It was raining. The end was quiet. It was not like in the movies. There was no dramatic speech. There was just the steady, slow beep of the heart monitor. I had been sitting in the hospital chair for 3 days. I had not left. I read to her. I held her hand. Her hand used to be so warm and strong. Now it was thin. The skin was like paper. I was holding her hand when the beeping sound changed. It became one long, steady tone. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the sound of the rain against the hospital window and the long, terrible silence of that machine. I was the only one in the room. I was the one who called the funeral home. I was the one who answered the doctor's questions. My voice was calm. I did not cry, not yet. I was my grandmother's granddaughter. I was handling it. I went back to the empty house. I walked into her bedroom. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand. Her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird was there, with a bookmark halfway through. I sat in her reading chair, and that is when I cried. I cried for the 3-year-old girl she saved. I cried for the woman who taught me how to be strong. I cried because the only person in the entire world who truly saw me was gone. The grief was a heavy blanket I could not take off. It was suffocating. A week later, her lawyer called me. He was a kind old man named Mr. Abernathy. He had been Grandma's lawyer for 30 years. Emma, he said, his voice gentle, we need to read the will. Your grandmother was very clear about her instructions. I went to his office. It was dusty and smelled like coffee. He sat me down and put on his reading glasses. This is very straightforward, Emma, he said. He opened a simple 1-page document. I, Margaret Lawson, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. He read the legal parts, and then he got to the main part. I leave my entire estate, real and personal, to my granddaughter Emma Lawson. She has been my sole comfort and caregiver. She is my daughter in all but name. He looked up at me over his glasses. That's it. She left you the house, her savings, her stocks. It's all yours, Emma. It's not a billionaire's fortune, but it's everything she had. She wanted you to be secure. I just nodded. I could not speak. It was not about the money. It was about the words. My daughter in all but name. I spent the next few weeks in a fog. I started the long, slow process of cleaning out the house. I found her old cardigans and folded them. I boxed up her books. Every object held a memory. The house was full of her, but it was so empty. Then one morning, the doorbell rang. I was in my sweatpants. My hair was a mess. I had not been sleeping. I opened the door and my heart stopped. It was them. My parents, Deborah and Carl Lawson, stood on the porch. They were dressed in black. It was expensive, new black. My mother wore dark sunglasses, even though it was a cloudy day. My father's shoes were polished. "Emma," my mother said. Her voice was thick with a sadness I had never heard from her. She pulled the sunglasses down and I saw her eyes. They were not red. She was forcing herself to look sad. She held a tissue in her hand, but she was not using it. "We came to pay our respects," she said. "We came as soon as we heard. We are devastated." I knew even then that was a lie. Grandma had been gone for 3 weeks. The funeral was 2 weeks ago. I had sent them an invitation. They had not come. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice was flat. I did not move to let them in. "Oh, honey," my mother said, pushing past me into the hallway. She gave me a stiff, awkward hug. Her perfume was the same. Lilies and coldness. As she hugged me, her eyes were scanning the hallway. She was looking at the antique mirror. She was looking at the paintings on the wall. She was assessing. My father put his hand on my shoulder. It did not feel like a comfort. It felt like a weight. "We're so sorry, Emma," he said. But his eyes were not on me. They were on the grandfather clock in the corner. "We need to make sure you're handling the estate properly. Your grandmother was... she was old. We need to see the will." There it was. Not, "How are you?" Not, "We're sorry we weren't here." We need to see the will. It took me all of 10 minutes to realize why they were really there. I sat them in the living room. Grandma's living room. I gave them tea in Grandma's teacups. My hands were shaking. I went to the desk and got my copy of the will. I handed it to my father. He read it. His face was blank. Then he read it again. A slow, dark red color crawled up his neck. "This is ridiculous," he said. His voice was not sad anymore. It was cold. He threw the paper on the coffee table. "Carl, calm down," my mother said, but her voice was tight. The fake sadness was gone. Her eyes were sharp and hard. She looked at me. It was not a mother's look. It was the look of a stranger. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Your grandmother was very sick at the end. She was on a lot of medication." She was confused. She clearly did not know what she was doing. "She knew exactly what she was doing," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was shaking with a new, cold anger. "She was perfectly sound of mind." "Don't be naive," my father snapped. He stood up. He was a big man. He always used his size to be intimidating. "We are her children. This house, this money, it belongs to us. It's our birthright." "You were not here," I said, standing up too. "You were never here. I was here. I took care of her. She was my mother." My mother let out a small, sharp laugh. It was a terrible sound. "Oh, Emma, don't be so dramatic. You were the girl she took in. A glorified nurse. We are her blood. That is what matters in a court of law." Suddenly, my absence did not seem so inconvenient to them anymore. Suddenly, I was not the child they left behind. I was the thief who had stolen their money. "You need to leave," I said. My father pointed a finger at me. "You will hear from our lawyer. This is not over. You will not steal what is ours." They left. The door slammed. The smell of my mother's perfume lingered in the air. By the end of that week, a man in a cheap suit delivered legal papers to my door. I was being sued. I sat on the porch step, the thick envelope in my lap. I read the words: Plaintiff, Carl Lawson and Deborah Lawson. Defendant, Emma Lawson. I read the claims: undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity. They were accusing me of manipulating my dying grandmother. They were accusing me of isolating her. They were accusing me of forcing her to change her will, my own parents. The two people who had abandoned me. The betrayal was so deep it almost choked me. They had not come for me. They had not come for Grandma. They had come for the money. And they were willing to destroy my life to get it. The lawsuit hit the local papers 2 days later. I did not know it until I went to the grocery store. It was a normal Friday morning. I was just buying milk and bread. I was on autopilot, still numb with grief. I walked past the local newsstand at the front of the store, and I saw my own face. The headline was big and black. It was designed to shock. Parents sue estranged daughter for elder abuse. Elder abuse. They had used a photo of me from Grandma's funeral. I was walking out of the church. I was crying. My face was red and swollen. I looked broken. The article made it look like I was crying tears of guilt. I remember standing in the aisle. I was holding a carton of milk. My hands were trembling so badly that I dropped it. It burst open on the white tile floor. Milk splashed everywhere. I just stood there, staring at the white puddle. I felt like that milk, spilled, wasted, exposed. A store employee came over, annoyed. "Ma'am, are you okay?" People were staring. I could feel their eyes. I looked at the people in line. They were looking at me, and then looking at the newspaper, and then looking back at me. They were putting it together. I felt sick. I turned and ran out of the store. I left my basket. I left the puddle of milk. I got in my car and locked the doors. I was shaking so hard I could not put the key in the ignition. I bought the paper from a machine on the corner. I had to read it. The article was full of lies. Sources close to the family, it said, claimed the Lawsons were systematically isolated from their loving mother, Margaret by her granddaughter, Emma. It quoted my father. "We are heartbroken. We just want justice for our mother. She was not herself at the end. She was a vulnerable old woman." It quoted my mother. "This isn't about money. It's about what's right. We just want to honor our mother's true wishes." Honor. They didn't even know the meaning of the word. It got worse. They had hired a public relations firm. They were not just suing me. They were trying to destroy my reputation in the small town that Grandma loved. The phone started ringing. It was not friends calling to offer support. It was nosy neighbors. "Emma, dear, I saw the paper. I just can't believe it." Their voices were full of fake sympathy. What they meant was, "Tell me the gossip." "Did you do it?" I stopped answering the phone. I went to the library to return Grandma's last book. Mrs. Gable, the librarian who had known me since I was 3, saw me walk in. She got very busy. She looked down at her computer and pretended not to see me. She was my grandmother's best friend. And she was avoiding me. The poison was working. My parents were painting me as a monster. And people were believing them. I felt completely, utterly alone. I was an outcast in my own home. A few days later, my mother went on the local news. I saw a preview for it and I knew I had to watch. I sat on Grandma's sofa, in the dark, and watched my mother perform. She sat on a bright blue sofa in the TV studio. She wore a plain gray sweater. She was trying to look simple. She was trying to look like a victim. The reporter, a woman with bright blonde hair, leaned in. "Deborah, this must be so painful. Tell us what happened." My mother nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This time the tears were real. They were tears of performance. She had practiced this. We loved my mother so much, she said, her voice breaking. And she wasn't herself at the end. She was very isolated. She was all alone. "And you believe your daughter Emma is responsible for that isolation?" the reporter asked. My mother nodded, letting out a small, rehearsed sob. "We tried to visit. We tried so hard. We would call. We would drive down. But Emma always had an excuse. She always said, 'Mom's too tired.' Or, 'It's not a good time.' She kept us away." "You're lying." I screamed at the television. The room was empty. No one could hear me. "She isolated my mother from us," my mother continued, looking right into the camera. Her eyes were full of fake pain. "We just want what's fair. We just want what's rightfully ours. We want to protect our mother's memory. Protect her memory." I suddenly flashed back to a memory from 2 years ago. Grandma was in the hospital for a week with pneumonia. She was scared. She kept asking for my father. "Where is Carl?" she would whisper. I called him. I begged him. "Dad, she's asking for you. Please, just come for an hour." I remember his sigh. It was so full of annoyance. "Emma, you don't understand. We're in the middle of a kitchen remodel. The contractors are here. We can't just drop everything and drive 3 hours for a cold. It's pneumonia, Dad. She's 82. She'll be fine. You're there, aren't you? You handle it. We'll try to get there next month." He never came, and now he was on television playing the part of the grieving son. I turned off the TV. The house was silent. The only sound was my own breathing. They were not just trying to take the house. They were not just trying to take the money. They were trying to steal my past. They were trying to erase the truth. They were trying to erase me. I could have settled. I could have given them the money just to make it stop. It would have been easier. But that night I sat in Grandma's reading chair. I looked at her old law books on the shelf. I could almost hear her voice. Silence protects the guilty, Emma. They had started this. They had brought this fight. They had lied in public, but I had the truth. I had the proof. They thought I was just a sad, quiet girl. They had forgotten what she taught me. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The cold, heavy sadness was gone. In its place was something else. A cold, hard clarity. I made a pot of coffee. I sat at Grandma's kitchen table. My parents had a PR firm and an expensive lawyer. They thought they had the upper hand. I had something better. I had the truth. And I had 2 decades of legal training from the best teacher in the world. I was not the emotional, grieving girl they painted me as. I was a legal professional. First, I called my job. I was a paralegal at a small, respected law firm in Boston. David, I said to my boss, I have to quit. Emma, what's wrong? I saw the papers. It's horrible. We're all on your side, you know. I know, I said, but I can't fight this and work at the same time. I have a family matter to attend to. I have to fight for my grandmother, and I have to do it myself. He was quiet for a moment. Well, he said, you're one of the best paralegals I've ever had. If you're building your own case, I feel sorry for the other side. Good luck, Emma. The job is here for you when you're done. I hung up. I felt a small, sharp pang of fear. I had just quit my job. I had no income. But then I looked around the house. This was my job now. For the next month, I did not sleep. I turned Grandma's quiet house into a war room. I moved the dining room table against the wall. I set up my laptop. I pulled out boxes and boxes of files from the attic. Grandma kept everything. My parents thought I was a librarian's granddaughter. They had forgotten what that meant. It meant I was organized. It meant I was meticulous. It meant I knew how to find information. I built my own defense. I started with Grandma's journals. I stacked them on the table. There were 20 of them, one for every year I lived with her. Her handwriting was neat and clear. I read her words, and I cried. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of strength. Grandma had been building my case for me for 20 years, an entry from 5 years ago. Deborah and Carl want what they never earned. They always have. They think love is a bank account. But Emma, she is my peace. She is the only one who shows up. She is the only one who asks for nothing and gives everything. An entry from 2 years ago. Carl called today. He did not ask how I was feeling. He asked if I had the house appraised recently. I told him it was none of his business. He got angry. He said I owed them. Owed them for what? For being born? He hung up. An entry from 6 months ago. Deborah called, crying. She said they were in trouble with their mortgage. She needed $10,000. I said no. I told her I was putting my money aside for Emma. She said I was a cruel old woman. She said Emma had poisoned me against them. The truth is, they poisoned themselves against me long ago. I made copies of every single page. Then I built my own evidence files. I had folders for everything. I had receipts from the pharmacy for her heart medication. I had time-stamped receipts from 2:14 a.m. I had receipts from the grocery store, buying Ensure and soup and applesauce. I had calendars with every single doctor's appointment, every physical therapy session. And next to every entry, I had written, attended with Grandma. I had my phone records. I had called my parents 47 times in the last 3 years. They had called me twice. I had the shoebox. The box of busy cards. I laid them out in a long, sad line on the floor. Christmas 2005. Birthday 2006. Christmas 2006. All the same. We're busy. This was my proof. This was the map that showed where the fence really was. And then in the back of her desk, locked in a small drawer, I found the file I was looking for. I found their evidence. It was a credit card statement. A card in Grandma's name that I never knew existed. My parents were authorized users. They had not used it recently. They were too smart for that. They knew she was failing. They were building their isolation case. But they had used it for years. The charges were from 5, 10, 15 years ago. Le Bistro, Boston. Charge $400. I cross-referenced the date. It was the same week Grandma had a fall, and I was working double shifts to pay for a home care nurse. They were eating steak. Bahamas Air. Charge $1,200. I cross-referenced the date. It was their 25th wedding anniversary. The week after I called my father, begging him to come to the hospital because Grandma had pneumonia. He had told me he was remodeling the kitchen. He was packing for vacation. Gucci, New York, charge $2,500. The date was December 20th. It was their Christmas present to themselves. The same week, they sent me a busy card with $20 in it. They were not just absent parents. They were parasites. They had been slowly, quietly draining her for years. This was not neglect. This was theft. This was exploitation. I did not feel rage. I felt a cold, heavy calm. I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth. I organized every file. I made 3 sets of binders. One for me, one for the judge, one for their lawyer. I labeled them financial records, medical care, personal correspondence, proof of neglect. My parents' case was built on lies, on feelings, on what they thought they were owed. My case was built on paper, on facts, on receipts and dates, and her own handwriting. I was not the emotional, grieving girl they painted me as. I was her granddaughter, and I was ready for court. That truth, Grandma's truth, was about to speak louder than their lawyers ever could. The day of the hearing was cold. A sharp, wet November wind blew leaves across the courthouse steps. I walked in alone. I had my lawyer, David Lang, but I felt alone. This was my fight. The courtroom was small and old. The wooden benches were dark and worn down. The air smelled like floor wax and old paper and the faint, nervous sweat of people waiting for their lives to change. My parents were already there. They were sitting at the plaintiff's table right up front. My mother, Deborah, was wearing a simple, expensive black dress. She was trying to look like a grieving daughter. My father, Carl, wore a dark suit and a somber tie. They were whispering to their lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrison. He was slick. His hair was perfect. His suit was too shiny. He looked like he sold bad cars. I sat down at the table behind them. I placed my simple 3-ring binder on the table in front of me. It looked small compared to the stack of files their lawyer had. The bailiff called out, "All rise." The judge entered. This was Judge Harmon. He looked at the room, sat down, and put on his glasses. "Case 447B, Lawson v. Lawson. Are both parties present?" Mr. Harrison stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Harrison on behalf of the plaintiffs, Carl and Deborah Lawson." David Lang stood up. "David Lang, Your Honor, for the defendant, Ms. Emma Lawson." The judge nodded. "Mr. Harrison, you may begin." Mr. Harrison walked to the center of the room. He was a performer. He took a deep, sad breath. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "This is a tragedy. This is a case of heartbreak. My clients, Deborah and Carl Lawson, are here today because their loving mother, Margaret, was stolen from them in her final days." He gestured toward me. He did not look at me. He just pointed, as if I was a piece of trash on the floor. "She was stolen by a manipulative granddaughter," he said, his voice rising. "A young woman who saw an opportunity. A young woman who, in Margaret's final, confused and medicated days, systematically isolated her. She poisoned her mind against her own children. She coerced her. She forced her to change a will that had, for decades, reflected Margaret's true wishes, to leave her legacy to her son and daughter." I sat perfectly still. I looked at the judge. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at their lawyer. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a trapped bird. I thought of what he said, confused. I thought of Grandma, 2 weeks before she died, helping me find a loophole in a contract for my job. Isolated. I thought of the 2 a.m. runs to the pharmacy for her heart medication. I thought of holding her hand while we watched old movies. Coerced. I thought of her strong, clear handwriting in her journal. "This is not about money, Your Honor," Mr. Harrison continued. "This is about justice. This is about protecting the elderly from predators, even when that predator is family." He sat down. The room was silent. He had painted a very ugly picture. I could feel the nosy neighbors in the back row staring at me. I could feel their judgment. Then David Lang stood up. David was not slick. He was not a performer. He was just a good, honest man. He was wearing a slightly wrinkled suit. He buttoned his jacket. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was calm. It was not loud, but it cut through the room. "Mr. Harrison is right. This is a tragedy. But the tragedy is not what he described." He walked to the small projector I had set up. "My client, Ms. Lawson, is not going to tell you a story today. She is just going to show you the truth." Mr. Harrison talked about decades. We agree. Let's look at those decades. Let's look at the history. He pressed a button. The projector hummed. An image appeared on the white screen on the wall. It was a phone record. These, David said, are the phone records for my client's cell phone for the last 2 years of Margaret Lawson's life. You will see 47 calls placed from Ms. Lawson to her parents, the plaintiffs, begging them to visit, giving them updates on their mother's health. He clicked to the next slide. And these are the incoming calls. Two calls from the plaintiffs to Ms. Lawson in 2 years. Someone in the back row gasped. They were not isolated, Your Honor, David said quietly. They were absent. He clicked again. A new image. It was one of the birthday cards. The one from my 16th birthday. This is the correspondence they sent. Hope you're doing well. We're busy. This was for her 16th birthday. This is the loving relationship they are claiming was poisoned. My mother shifted in her seat. My father was staring at the screen, his face hardening. David clicked again. Now it was the wire transfers. The ones from Grandma's account to my parents. Mr. Harrison claims my client was a financial predator. This is interesting, because these are wire transfers from Margaret Lawson to Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. $10,000 here, $5,000 here, dating back 15 years. They were not visits. They were bailouts. Mr. Harrison stood up. Objection! This is irrelevant to the will. It is highly relevant to the nature of the relationship, Your Honor, David said. It establishes a long-term pattern of financial exploitation by the plaintiffs. I'll allow it, Judge Harmon said. His voice was like stone. Sit down, Mr. Harrison. David clicked one last time. The image on the screen was not a document. It was handwriting. It was a page from Grandma's journal. David read it out loud. August 14th. Deborah asked for more money again. She said they needed it for the house. I know it's for something else. I told her no. She said I was cruel. I can't keep bailing them out. They are grown. Emma is the only one who helps without asking for anything. She is my peace. The courtroom went completely, totally silent. Mr. Harrison was just staring. My parents looked like they had been slapped. David Lang turned off the projector. The plaintiffs were not victims of isolation, Your Honor. They were the architects of it. They were not there. My client was. The will reflects that simple, painful truth. The defense rests. The silence in the courtroom was a heavy, thick thing. It was heavier than any sound. Mr. Harrison was shuffling his papers. He was supposed to cross-examine me, but David hadn't put me on the stand. He hadn't needed to. The documents had spoken for me. The judge, Judge Harmon, was not looking at the lawyers. He was not looking at my parents. He was looking at me. He was an older man with white hair and kind eyes. But they were sharp eyes. He had seen everything in this town. He was known for being fair, but he was not known for being soft. He was squinting. He leaned forward in his big chair. He looked from the binders on my table to my face, and then back to the binders. Wait a second, the judge said. His voice was quiet. The court reporter stopped typing. My father looked up, annoyed. My mother looked confused. Ms. Lawson, the judge said, speaking directly to me. My lawyer, David, looked at me and nodded, giving me permission to speak. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice was small, but it didn't shake. Your face is familiar to me, he said. He was thinking. He was shuffling through the papers of the case file. I've seen your name. Emma Lawson. He looked up again. Did you clerk in this circuit? For Judge Brenner? My heart stopped. He remembered. Yes, Your Honor, I said. 2 years ago. I clerked for Judge Brenner for 1 year, right after law school. The entire room shifted. The air changed. My mother's head snapped toward me. Her eyes were wide. What? She whispered. It wasn't to the judge. It was to me. My father just looked blank. He had no idea what a law clerk was, but Mr. Harrison knew. Their lawyer's face drained of all its color. He understood. Judge Harmon leaned back. He let out a long, slow breath. He looked at my binders. He looked at the projector. He looked at the neatly organized, cross-referenced, and perfectly cited evidence. Well, the judge said, a small, sad smile on his face. That explains the filings. He looked at my lawyer. Mr. Lang, I was impressed. I was wondering how a small-town lawyer had put together a case file that was more thorough than most corporate firms. The evidentiary briefs, the cross-referencing on the financial statements. This is not the work of a standard paralegal. He looked back at me. His eyes were not just kind anymore. They were respectful. This is the work of a clerk. This is one of the most thorough. No, this is the most thorough self-defense case I have ever seen in this courtroom. You built this, didn't you, Ms. Lawson? Yes, Your Honor, I said. I did. This was the moment. This was the quiet bomb that landed in the middle of the room. The nosy neighbors in the back were whispering. The local reporter was writing as fast as he could. My parents finally understood. They hadn't just sued their grieving, quiet daughter. They hadn't sued the helpless girl they had painted in the newspapers. They had sued a legal professional, an officer of the court. They had sued someone who knew exactly how to build a case, someone who knew exactly how to use their own lies against them. My mother's hand went to her throat. She looked at my father. She's a lawyer? She hissed, her voice full of panic. My father's face was pale. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. He just looked small. This was the truth they had never bothered to learn. They never asked me about my job. They never asked about my school. They never asked about my life. They were so busy being absent. They had no idea who I had become. Their ignorance was their downfall. The judge's voice softened. He was just looking at me now. Ms. Lawson, he said, you are more than prepared for this, aren't you? I thought of all the nights Grandma read to me from her law books. I thought of her teaching me to find the truth. I learned from the best, Your Honor, I said quietly. My grandmother. Judge Harmon looked at my parents' lawyer. Mr. Harrison, does your client, Mrs. Lawson, still wish to testify? Mr. Harrison looked trapped. He knew he had to. His whole case was based on her heartbreak. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice weak. My mother, Deborah, walked to the witness stand. She was not the confident, fake sad woman from the news. She was trembling. She looked small. She was sworn in. Mr. Harrison tried to ask her questions. Mrs. Lawson, can you please tell the court about your relationship with your mother? We were very close, she stammered. Her eyes kept flickering to me, and then to the judge. And did your daughter, Emma, prevent you from seeing your mother? Yes, she said. She isolated us. She never let us know what was happening. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Lawson, this court has seen phone records showing your daughter called you 47 times in 2 years. Can you explain how 47 phone calls constitutes isolation? I don't recall, she said. We were busy. That word again. Busy. David Lang stood up for the cross-examination. He was holding my notes. He was my voice. Mrs. Lawson, he said, his voice gentle. You testified you were systematically isolated. Can you tell me the last time you visited your mother before her final illness? In the last, say, 5 years? My mother's face went white. She stared at David. I don't remember the exact date. Let me help you, David said. He walked to the projector. He clicked a button. A new image appeared. It was a photo. A photo my mother had posted on social media. She was on a beach holding a drink. She was smiling. The caption said, "Another beautiful day in the Bahamas. Soaking up the sun. 2018. This was posted on March 12th, 2018, David said. He clicked again. A hospital record appeared. Margaret Lawson. Admitted. March 10th, 2018. Diagnosis. Pneumonia. Your mother was in the hospital fighting for her life, David said. Were you busy in the Bahamas, Mrs. Lawson? The week your daughter called you, begging you to come? My mother put her hand to her mouth. She said she was fine. Emma said she was handling it. She said she was scared, I whispered. No one heard me but myself. Let's talk about that handling, David said. He was relentless but quiet. You said you were concerned about your mother's financial well-being, that you were worried she was being exploited. He called my father, Carl, to the stand. My father was not small anymore. He was angry. He sat down heavily. Mr. Lawson, David said, you stated in your claim that you were worried your daughter was taking your mother's money. Yes, my father boomed. She was. This is a disgrace. You're twisting our words. Mr. Lawson, David said, his voice never rising. He clicked the projector. The credit card statements appeared. The ones I found in Grandma's desk, a charge for $2,500 at a Gucci store in New York, a charge for $1,200 for plane tickets, a charge for $400 at an expensive steakhouse, all on Margaret Lawson's credit card, all used by Carl and Deborah Lawson. Mr. Lawson, can you identify these charges? David asked. Is this the exploitation you were worried about? The exploitation by you? My father's face turned a dark, blotchy red. He stood up from the witness stand. You, he shouted. He was not looking at David. He was looking at me. He pointed his finger. You did this. You little snake. That was our money. She owed us. Sit down, Judge Harmon roared. The courtroom shook. The judge slammed his gavel. Mr. Lawson, you will sit down, or I will have you removed for contempt. You are in a court of law, not a bar fight. My father froze. The anger drained away, replaced by shock. He had been silenced. He slumped back into the chair. David Lang looked at the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiffs have made their position very clear. We have one final piece of evidence. It's a video message. It was recorded by Margaret Lawson herself, 1 month before her death. It was filed with her will at Mr. Abernathy's office, with the explicit instruction to be shown in court should her children contest the will. The judge nodded. Play it. The lights in the courtroom dimmed a little. The projector screen lit up, and there she was. It was Grandma. She was in her reading chair. She was wearing her favorite blue cardigan. She looked thin. She looked tired. But her eyes were clear. They were sharp. She was looking right at the camera. Hello, Emma, she said. Her voice was weak, but it was steady. I felt the tears finally come. I put my hand over my mouth. If you are watching this, she said, it means I'm gone. And it means Carl and Deborah are causing trouble. Just as I feared. My mother let out a small strangled sound. I need the world to know the truth, Grandma said. I am of sound mind. I am of sound body for the most part. And I am making this choice. She looked right into the camera, as if she was looking past me, at my parents. My children, Carl and Deborah, they chose their path, a long time ago. They chose to be busy. They chose money over time. They were not here. She paused and her expression softened. She looked back at the camera. But Emma? Emma, you showed up. When I was sick, when I was lonely, when I was scared, you were there. You held my hand. You read to me. You made me soup. You are my daughter. You are my daughter in all the ways that matter. Tears were rolling down my face now. I was not ashamed. I left you everything, Emma, she said. Not because of money. I left you everything because you earned it. You earned it with love. You are my legacy. Don't let them take that from you. Don't let them rewrite our story. The video ended. The screen went black. The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear my mother, Deborah. She was not faking it now. She was sobbing. A raw, ugly, broken sound. My father just stared at the blank screen. His face was gray. He whispered one thing. This can't be happening. The fall was complete. The pretenders were broken. The silence after the video was different. It was not a tense silence. It was a final silence. My parents' lawyer, Mr. Harrison, just sat at his table. He looked defeated. He had nothing left to say. He looked at the judge and just shook his head. No further statements, Your Honor. Judge Harmon took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his eyes closed. He looked tired. He looked sad. When he opened his eyes, he looked directly at my parents. His gaze was not angry. It was worse. It was full of a cold, deep disappointment. He did not need to deliberate. He did not need to recess. This was not a he said, she said case. This was a they said she proved case. I have presided in this court for 20 years, Judge Harmon began. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of the room. I have seen family disputes. I have seen arguments over money. I have seen greed. But rarely, he said, his eyes locking on my father, have I seen such a calculated, cynical, and baseless claim brought before this court. My father flinched, as if he had been struck. The plaintiffs, Carl and Deborah Lawson, filed a claim of undue influence. The court finds this claim to be without merit. The only influence I see here is the positive influence of love and daily care from the defendant, Ms. Emma Lawson. And the only other influence I see is the influence of profound and willful neglect from the plaintiffs. He was not just giving a verdict. He was validating my entire life. The plaintiffs also filed a claim of elder abuse, he continued. His voice got harder. This is a serious accusation. To use such a term, to splash it across the newspapers, it is an insult to actual victims of that terrible crime. The evidence presented today has shown that the only person who protected Margaret Lawson was her granddaughter. The evidence has shown that it was the plaintiffs who were financially exploiting Mrs. Lawson for decades, all while her granddaughter was the one paying for her medication and buying her groceries. He looked at my mother. You were not isolated. You were absent. You were not victims. You were and are neglectful. He picked up his gavel. The plaintiffs have not only failed to prove undue influence, they have, in fact, proven their own breathtaking neglect and emotional abandonment of both their mother and their daughter. Therefore, the court finds entirely and completely in favor of the defendant, Ms. Emma Lawson. The will of Margaret Lawson stands. This case is dismissed. With prejudice, he paused. The legal part was over. Now the human part, he looked right at me. His eyes were soft again. And Ms. Lawson, he said, his voice now quiet. Just for me. As a former colleague and as a man, I hope your grandmother knew what an extraordinary woman you've become. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood tall. She did, Your Honor, I said. My voice was clear. She's the one who taught me. He smiled, a small, sad smile, and he brought the gavel down. Bang, it was over. My mother gasped. A sharp, ugly sound of defeat. My father was shaking. The rage had come back. His face was purple. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. He pointed at me. The whole courtroom was watching. His voice was a low, vicious hiss, but everyone could hear it in the silent room. You, he spat. You ruined us. You took everything. You took our money. You ruined our name. You have nothing. I looked at him. I was not the 3-year-old girl at the window anymore. I was not the 16-year-old girl hiding a busy card. All the fear I ever had of him was gone. It was just gone. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I just looked him in the eye. No, Dad, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was strong. I have the house. I have the memories. I have the truth. You have nothing. I turned. You didn't ruin me, I said, walking toward the aisle. You ruined yourselves. You ruined it all when you stopped showing up. I picked up my binder. I nodded to David Lang. He was smiling, and I walked out of the courtroom, past my broken parents, and into the cold, clean air. I did not look back. That evening, I drove home to Grandma's old house. The drive was quiet. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the road. I did not feel happy. I did not feel like celebrating. I just felt light. The heavy blanket I had been carrying my whole life, the weight of their absence, the sting of their betrayal, it was gone. I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark, but it did not look empty. It looked like home. I walked inside. I turned on the lights. The house was exactly as I left it. It was quiet. It was safe. I went to the kitchen and I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, her favorite. I went to the living room and sat in her reading chair by the fire. I held the warm mug in my hands. For the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. I had not fought them for the money. I had not fought them for the house. I had fought them for her. I had protected her memory. They tried to rewrite our story. They tried to tell the world she was confused and I was a monster. But the truth had spoken. I had proven that absence has consequences. I had proven that showing up is the only thing that matters. And I had done it without becoming like them. I had done it without rage. I had done it with her quiet strength. The next morning, I went through one of her boxes. I found a small piece of paper folded in 4. On it, she had written her favorite quote in her beautiful, clear handwriting. Justice doesn't shout. It shows up, quietly. I found an old wooden frame. I put the note inside it. I hung it on the wall, right above the mantel. I stood back and looked at it. That's what she taught me. That's who I became. If you've ever had to stand up to the people who were supposed to love you and prove who you really are, subscribe and share your story below. Because some families don't need loud revenge, they just need the truth to finally speak.